Good afternoon, everyone. It's a massive, wonderful audience. Thank you, everyone, for coming along. My name is Charlotte Wood, and I'm a writer from Sydney, and I am delighted to be here to delve into the writing process with two of the world's most beloved and prolific writers, and I'm calling them the Johns. This session is called Reflections on Writing. Before we begin, can I ask you to triple check that your phone is on silent? You don't want to be that person diving into your bag. And to remind you that we will have audience questions at the end, the emphasis on questions there. And of course that the authors will be signing in the bookshop after the session. If you are tweeting or Instagramming and would like to use the hashtag, it's ADLWW. And we also have some Auslan sign interpreters here. Thank you very much. So now that's done, let's settle in. As we begin talking about writing and storytelling here at the festival, it is of course fitting and essential to acknowledge the oldest continuous storytelling culture in the world and the first people of this place. We meet today on the traditional land for the Kaurna people, and we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. And of course we welcome any Indigenous people here today at this session. So moving from the original storytellers of this place, I'm going to introduce two more. John Birmingham has written well over 30 books in many genres, as well as features for Rolling Stone, Playboy, I like the next one, the Long Bay Prison News, Quarterly Essay and The Monthly. His books include the cult classic He Died With A Falafel in His Hand and the award-winning Leviathan, the unauthorised biography of Sydney. His handbook, How to Be a Writer Who Smashes Deadlines, Crushes Editors and Lives in a Solid Gold Hovercraft, was published in 2016. And last year, John released an essay called On Father, a very moving account of grief, depression, and the death of his father. Please give a warm welcome to John Birmingham. And here we have John Boyne. They're both called John B, which is going to be very tricky for me. John Boyne comes to us from Dublin. This is his last day in Australia after 5 weeks. So you're very lucky that you've caught him. He is the author of 11 novels for adults, 5 for younger readers, and a collection of short stories. You will all know his 2006 novel, The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas, because it sold 9 million copies worldwide and has been adapted for cinema, theatre, even ballet and opera. John has won 3 Irish Book Awards and many other international prizes, and his novels are published in over 50 languages. His latest books are the young adult novel My Brother's Name is Jessica, and for adults, Ladder to the Sky, a savage satire of writers and the publishing industry. Please give John a warm welcome and maybe a farewell to Adelaide. I just want to check, can everybody hear okay? Excellent. Right, I'm going to start broadly about your writing lives and then drill down into some of the specifics of the writing process. Let's start at the beginning. What made each of you want to be a writer in the first place? What attracted you to this strange, precarious existence we call writing? And John?
John will have a better answer than me. He'll be more serious, so go him first.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, firstly. I think the thing that made me want to write really was my parents, mostly. Because when I was growing up in Dublin, there was a library down the road from our house, and every Wednesday we used to get a half day from school, and my mum would bring myself and my brothers and sisters to the library, and it was such a big deal every week getting those 3 books out, choosing them, not making them, you don't want to choose the wrong book. And even at that age, at a very young age, reading and writing were completely connected to me. I couldn't do one without doing the other. And I had, and I still have, in common with I think a lot of writers, a total stationery fetish. that I just love notebooks and pens and post-it notes, and I have so much of this stuff at home that I never use, but I just love it. And if I'm in a stationery shop, I'll just spend a fortune in there. So I used to get my mum to buy me those kind of big foolscap paper, and I would just write stories. It wasn't a decision. And I think with a lot of writers, it's not a decision that you actively make. It's just something inside you from very young, and that the only way you feel kind of comfortable is writing stories. I was very shy and introverted as a kid, and that's where I found kind of my comfort, really.
And that was my answer. No, it actually was. We used to go to the library on Friday nights, but it was the same thing. You very much look forward to getting those books in. And I was a voracious reader, and when I had gone through my library stack for the week, I would default to this set of encyclopedias that we had, the Junior World Encyclopedia, and I just read them A to Z over and over and over again. And it helped me get through school without a lot of study. But eventually, I don't know why, but I wanted to sort of do what other people were doing on the page. And actually, I recall the guy kicked it off for me. It was John O'Grady, the 1960s satirist, who wrote, I think, his first book. Yeah, that's right. Nino Culotta, They're a Weird Mob.
Yeah, of course.
Somebody, in fact, a fan gave me a first edition of They're a Weird Mob the other day, and I was flicking through it. It's fantastic. John was this satirist who he wrote in the persona of an Italian migrant to Australia in the 1960s, and the books were just, they made me laugh out loud, and that was an incredible moment of power. This guy had sat down at a desk somewhere in the distant past. He'd put words on paper. I'd read those words, and he'd reached out through time and space and tickled me, and I'd laughed. And that moment of power was something I very much wanted to access. And so from a very, very young age, I used to sit up late at night on school nights, because I didn't need to study. I read all those encyclopedias. And I would copy out John O'Grady's books, word for word, line for line, paragraph after paragraph, seeing how he built the entire thing like a great sort of institution of words. And
did you know you were doing that to learn to write, or was it
No, I just wanted to know how he'd done it. And I figured the only way to learn was to, basically imitate what he had done, and then maybe I might learn through that imitation. And interestingly, I discovered later on Hunter S. Thompson had done exactly the same thing with Joseph Conrad, I think. Sat down and just wrote out his novels word for word.
Joseph O'Connor did that with Ernest Hemingway. Early in his career, he used to write out Ernest Hemingway stories just to see how the language would work, how the story was structured.
I think a lot of writers have done that. It's interesting, isn't it? I don't know if they've learned to do it or just that impulse to get inside it and figure out how it works. John Boyne, Ladder to the Sky is a very entertaining and dark satire of the publishing industry, particularly of people who want to be published more than they want to actually write. And you have a lot of fun with real writers in that book, including a section written from the point of view of Gore Vidal, no less. And you're actually pretty vicious about great big male writers and big prizes, about envy and ambition and so on, and what they do to writers.
It's because I'm consumed by envy.
I want to know how much of Ladder to the Sky was drawn from your observations in the field at writers' festivals and so on.
Well, quite a lot. I hope if some of you were here the other day when I was talking about this, I hope I don't repeat myself. But I've been publishing novels for 20 years. And because I've been fortunate enough to travel a lot with that to places around the world, I've met a lot of writers, I've done a lot of festivals. And you see how different people behave in different environments. And some of it is funny, and some of it is weird and creepy, and some of it is kind of upsetting at times, the way different people are treated. One example I gave the other day was that if there were two writers, for example, if we were both doing readings today, at some point before it, you would have had to say who wants to read first. So who wants to, and that's always awkward. And I remember doing a festival last year in Ireland where on the day itself, it was a weekend festival, and there was three kind of really big name male authors all doing a panel event together. And in the program it said, three of the great literary writers of our time here to entertain us, whatever. And later in the day or earlier, there was a panel with three female authors of equal stature, I would have thought. And in the program, it said three of the great storytellers of our time. And I remember looking at this, and actually I consider myself a storyteller first and foremost. But I remember, you look at things like that, and that's the kind of thing that you note down is, what does that mean? What has been said? So I tried to get a lot of that into the book. I'm not trying to bite the hand that feeds me, because actually I think publishing is full of really great people, and most people who work in publishing, most writers are very, very nice. But there's a few, let me name some.
Please do.
There's a few who do some crazy things, and I'm sure you've met them too, as have you. And it's kind of fun to sort of, satirize them a little bit. I'll tell you who the worst are. You want to know who the worst are? It's the 20-something men with the hair and the leather satchels, and who come in and they pretend they've never heard of them. What did you write? What did you write? And, and you go, you wouldn't have heard of me, don't worry about it, And they're the worst.
Yeah, writers with hair, mate, they suck.
I hate them. I hate them.
Yes, young writers with hair. Well, we're free of all that.
But I always find it, I always find that the easiest people to work with are the really successful writers, because they don't have any sort of chip on their shoulder, and they're just sort of happy to come in, do the thing, and do it professionally, and, go for a drink, and let that be the end of it,
Well, that segues nicely into something that I've always been interested that Raymond Carver said. He said, ambition and a little luck are good things for a writer to have going for him. Too much ambition and bad luck or no luck at all can be killing. Now, I sort of think that too much or too little of either ambition or luck can be a writer's undoing. So, John Birmingham, what is the role of ambition for a writer? How should a writer conceive of their ego in the process?
That's a tough question, because it's revealing of what monsters we are. You don't need a huge carnivorous ego to survive as a writer, but you do need some, because what you're doing is kind of bold is one way of saying it, but arrogant is another. You're taking a bunch of words, which literally any of you could do. Like, the thing about people, we're hear it again and again. We're a narrative species. I could sit down with almost all of you, and you could tell me a great story. And it would only be if we sort of changed the tools, took that sort of oral tool away from you and made you sit in front of a blank piece of paper or a screen and said, okay, do it again. Then you might seize up. But most people are storytellers, because, that's just our nature. And so how arrogant is it for us to suddenly put ourselves out there as, better than the rest of you? And that's effectively what we do as writers. And yet you do need to sort of grow a hide. Now, I remember the very first thing I ever published, it was just a piece in a student magazine, and I was inordinately proud of it. And a guy who I quite admired, because he was a good cricketer, came up to me and said, I saw what you wrote in the student mag. I said, yeah, what'd you think? He said, I didn't like it. And I said, quite honestly, well, I don't care. And I literally didn't. And you do... Yeah, I did a tour with Nick Earls and a couple of local writers. We all had that same experience. Somebody very, very early on in our careers, somebody who we'd actually looked up in some way, had come up to us and said, you know what, you're a bit ordinary. And every single one of us had gone, yeah, I don't care. We're going to keep going. And I think that sort of... the question was about ambition, but you peel away the ambition and there's a sort of seething nest of vipers that is really about ego underneath.
What about luck?
Huge, absolutely huge component.
Can you make your own luck? People say, I've made my own luck. What do you think about that?
I think you can make your own luck. I'll give you an example of it. After my first two books were published, they'd sold about 8 copies between them. And my publisher dropped me. And I was like 31 years old. And after all the time of trying to build up to a writing career, I felt like it was already over before it had even begun. And I went down to Wexford for a year in the south of Ireland, and I took a little house on the beach, and I was, writing a new book. And I heard an interview on the radio one day, and it was with Anthony Minghella, who I'm sure you know directed The English Patient and Talented Mr. Ripley. And Talented Mr. Ripley was one of my favorite films. And he was just talking about creativity, and something, the way he was talking about it really struck me. And I just decided off the bat, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to write to Anthony Minghella. And I was writing a novel at the time, and I wrote to him and I said, look, I'm a writer, I've published a couple of books, they haven't really taken off. I'd be interested in maybe writing a screenplay maybe at some point, which I had no interest in doing, I have to say at all. I wrote one screenplay once, I gave it to my film agent, and the first thing he said to me was, have you ever actually seen a film? But anyway, to cut a long story short, I wrote to Anthony, and to my amazement, he wrote back to me quite quickly, and he said, look, if you're ever over in London, give me a shout. And I was like, oh, well, by pure chance, I'm going to be in London on Tuesday, and Wednesday, and Thursday, and Friday. And so we met up, and we talked a lot about writing. We met up then several times. And I have to admit, I kind of parlayed that a little bit with my agent then, in terms of kind of getting a new book deal. That
doesn't strike me as luck, though, right?
Well, it's making your own luck, you asked.
Yeah.
Like you're seeing an opportunity and saying, I'm just like... And it wouldn't have been something I would be very good at. In real life, I'm quite introverted, and I don't really like putting myself out there too much. But I just thought at that point, look, you have to take a chance here, or this is going to get away from you, and this is all you want to do.
Yeah, you'll often be presented with opportunities to write, to tell a story, and you may not even recognise them at the time. And if you get the chance, if someone wants you to tell a story, then you should tell it. And you may well just bugger it up completely, as you did with your first 2 novels, I'll point out. But then, having done that, you open yourself up to other possibilities down the track.
And it takes, that to me speaks of the kind of burning desire in us to make work and have it out there. So if you want it enough, you take chances maybe that you wouldn't ordinarily. I thought that was a weird ringtone for a second there. I told you to turn them off. John Birmingham, you say in How to Be a Writer that if you're writing a column, you must not give a damn about upsetting people. Now, I suspect you've both upset people from time to time. John Boyne, you have lately upset people with...
I've upset everybody in the
My
last
brother's
year,
name is Jessica. How much this is a question for both of you, do you think about hostility, the possibility of hostility towards you as you're writing your books? Do you perhaps maybe even enjoy the prospect of upsetting people? Is it something that you think about in the process of writing?
Look, that's a tougher question than it sounds, because you don't want to be Andrew Bolt. So you don't be
certainly
that guy.
Do not.
But you also don't want to self-censor before you get anything on the page. And so it's particularly, whether you're writing fiction or non-fiction or opinion or journalism, you have to have some faith in the integrity of what you're doing. But you will, as soon as you publish anything, you will learn very, very quickly that there are as many versions of that story as there are people who read it. And not everyone is going to read a story that you wrote that they like, and they'll tell you all about it. And you need to be ready for that, and to, in some ways, not care. And yet, on the other hand, I've occasionally done bad things on the page or on screen, and people have pointed them out to me, and it's been really, really hard, but you have to sort of, actually, I buggered that up. And so that's a difficult sort of balancing act, to not care about the judgment of your writing, and yet to also realise that there are going to be occasions when you will completely F it up. And you need to be open to that criticism and to recognise when you've done it. Otherwise, you'll keep on doing it, and people will eventually stop listening to you.
Yeah, so doing it for effect is a kind of pointless exercise, right?
No, doing it for effect is good fun. But doing it with cruelty or just a lack of fellow feeling for other human beings, it's a very powerful thing, putting words on a page or a screen, and it can actually hurt people. Some people or some interests, I guess, they're in need of being hurt, but you got to have some care for your fellow human beings too.
John, did it hurt? So tell us, if you are happy to, about the kind of reaction from some people to My Brother's Name is Jessica. And did it hurt you to get that response?
This was a YA book, young adult book I published last year about a transgender teenager. And I wrote it with the very best intentions. I didn't set out to write something. I have no interest in setting out to be hostile to people or encouraging hostility. I wouldn't consider myself a controversialist in any way. I wrote a book that I thought was filled with empathy and consideration for kids who are going through this experience. And before the book was published, I was roundly denounced by people online for having the temerity to write about a character who I have no personal relationship to, despite the fact that I've done that in 17 previous books as well. And I don't mind somebody not liking a book. I don't mind somebody saying to me, I read that book, sorry, it wasn't for me, and this is why. What I do have a problem with is the fury and the venom that can come your way, and the ad hominem attacks that came on me, as if I was setting out deliberately to cause pain to people. And this was by people who had not read the book and who made a point of saying that they would not read the book. And I don't get that. It doesn't make sense to me.
So what did you do, mate? How'd you handle it?
I didn't handle it brilliantly. I'd never really been subject to that kind of abuse before, and it was ongoing for a few months. And in the first instance, I think I handled it badly by responding. That when people would say things on Twitter like, I wish you would die, don't go out alone, I've seen a picture of your sister, she looks, like this, and these are things that happened. I would respond not in the politest terms, maybe. And what I came to, I was at a school this morning here in Walford, and a kid asked me, what book has changed you most as a person and a writer? Which I thought was a great question, and it would be that book, because it by the end of the experience, what I realized is you cannot respond to this sort of thing. You cannot engage. If you engage, you are sinking down to a level of argument that you will never win in the first place. And there's simply no point. That people just want to be heard. And I wonder why they want to be heard and why they want to be heard in such aggressive fashion. But it did hurt me, I have to say, and I came out of it wounded, just because I'm not accustomed to that. I'm generally a sort of a quiet guy who lives at home, and suddenly, people were screaming at me and things. And even on the street, if I went into like a gay club, say in Dublin, and there was trans people there, they would be coming over and shouting in my face. And you're going, I was only trying to help. And then I got told, well, you're helping in the wrong way. And you're thinking, well, why did I even bother? So anyway. I mean, maybe some of it was my fault, but either way, I just don't think, we were talking the other day about Janine Cummins in American Dirt. I don't think the act of writing a novel is so awful that anybody needs to be quite so vilified and bullied for it.
Well, yes, the online attacks without reading the book is a whole other thing. And
that was just by my parents.
Bada bing. John Birmingham, I'm going to move on to the process of writing books. You've got quite a rigorous process that you've developed over time. You write in so many different genres. Tell us about this process, and is it the same for all the books?
In some ways, yeah. The mechanics of writing for me is the same. Once a project gets beyond a certain length, I need to come at it and use the process that I've developed. Otherwise, I'll get it finished. I'll grind through. I've done 30 of these things. I know how to do them, but I've just, over the years, have eventually settled on this way of moving through a book that means I can, do it with a lot less stress and anxiety. And so, books, they're big. Like, it's... you sit down, like a lot of people, I'm going to imagine a few of you have sat down with a blank piece of paper and, good intentions at some point, and maybe you get like a couple of pages in, maybe you even got halfway through, but eventually what happened was you looked up and you saw the mountain that was still in front of you and still there to climb, and it paralyzed you, and you stopped, and eventually you just tumbled all the way down the bottom. And so we all go through that. To avoid being paralysed by the fear and the weight of the project, I've sort of developed a couple of little tricks, and one of them is I plot. And that's just me personally. Some people like to plot, some people just like to see the story unfold. For me, if I have a nice blueprint and I know what I'm doing each time I turn up at the desk, that helps. But even if I didn't do that, even if I was someone who just, wrote by the seat of my pants, I would still write the way that I do. And that's very simple. I turn up at my desk at the same time every day, and I work, rather than thinking about the number of words I'm going to write, I have a certain number of hours I have to work. And I don't even think of them as hours. I think of them as red dots. I have this little diary, stationery. Mate, I'm all over that with you. We'll have a chat about it later on. I got this fantastic diary in Korea late last year, and it's my writing diary for this year. And what I do is each day starts with a 25-minute block of writing, and then 25 minutes is just enough to sort of break the shackles and get you moving. And then I have a little 5-minute break, a bit of a stretch. I sit down. I do an hour. And when I've done that hour, I take my red texter and I put one red dot in my writing book. And then I have a break, 10 minutes or so, a bit of a stretch, go out, hit the heavy bag, give the dog a pat, whatever. I come back, do another hour. And when I've got that hour, the red dot goes in the book. And so for me, writing a book is not a process of, doing 100,000 words or 2,000 words a day or something. When I go to my desk in the morning, what I'm thinking is I need to get 4 red dots in that book. And if I do that, the first draft of that novel is going to be ready in about 6 weeks. It's that simple. And so, if I had to boil my entire process down, it's that. I work in hour-long blocks and I give myself the reward of a little red dot each time I make. And when I've done the 4 or 5 hours that I'm doing that day, that's it. I'm done. And that is its own reward. I can go do something else.
Going to get myself a red texter on the way home from here. John Boyne, see, I normally feel like I'm quite productive having written 8 books, but like in this company, I am a complete slouch. I'm thinking, well, you've told us about your red dot routine. I love that. John Boyne, I believe that you wrote the first draft of Boy in the Striped Pyjamas in one 60-hour frenzy. I want to know, is this normal for you? Does this happen with all of your books?
No, it's not It's not a normal way to write.
Thank God for that.
But it did happen. It's true. It's with Striped Pyjamas. I had the idea on a Tuesday night for the book, and I started writing it really just, as you said, by the seat of my pants on Wednesday morning, not knowing what it was going to be. And by Wednesday evening, I felt that if I walked away from that story, I was going to lose it because it seemed to be just pouring out of me. So I wrote through Wednesday, wrote through Wednesday night, wrote through Thursday night, and then Friday at lunchtime, I had 50,000 words, the first draft of that book. And it was also my birthday. I went out with some friends that evening, and I was really, really exhausted, obviously. And I told them what I'd been doing over the last few days. And all I really wanted was to, get some sleep, but then get back to it. It's never happened before or since, but one thing that can happen, I suppose, as a writer is sometimes something takes over you and you just have to go with it. You have to, maybe that's the luck thing as well of sort of being, I often think to myself, I'm glad I didn't have anything on that Thursday or Friday, all those millions of copies, I would have lost them. So but it was a great experience, and it was an enjoyable one. And you know, I don't think we talk about that enough sometimes in writing it, about how enjoyable it is and the fun of it, and how exciting it is, and that when it's going really well, when you're working on the novel and you feel the novel's coming together, and you think this is going to be something that readers will enjoy, how good you feel. You know, you come away from your desk feeling excited and wanting to get back to it.
It's flow, isn't it? It's not just you being in the flow. You can feel the thing flowing out of you onto the page.
Yeah, because I don't like those writers who say that they hate doing it, and you often hear that in interviews. You know, people saying, "Well, I hate writing. I wish I didn't have to do it," and you just do want to say, "Well, then don't." You know, just go get another job. I think it's insulting to so many people who have stories. And
do you think that's just an affectation to
it can be a bit, you know, but it's if you're lucky enough to be able to do it and make a life out of it, you know, I think just be grateful for it.
So were you typing when you?
Yeah, I was typing. Yeah, and it was just pouring out. I had a full head of hair on the Wednesday, and on Friday it was just all gone.
I love the hair jokes. Now, John Birmingham, you storyboard your books as if they're films, right? Very detailed. I think it's a 6-week process-ish. And I love, you mentioned George R.R. Martin's gardeners and architects analogy, which I love. What do you do when the story starts to shift from your storyboard?
Well, inevitably it does, because one of the things that happens when you start writing these things is about, 20 or 30 pages in, if you're doing it properly, the characters will come alive, and they will be as alive in your head as all of you guys are in the real world, and they will act with agency. They'll start to, you don't have to make up their dialogue. They say it. You don't need to ask yourself, what are they going to do? They will do it. And that sounds magical and great, but of course, if you've got this plan, I need you to do this in this part of the storyboard, and they want to go off in another direction, you know what? Let them go off.
Even in genre, sort of very plot-driven stuff?
Yeah, I think so. It's if a character wants to do that, then I will generally... as an example, I did a book, a big alternate history. Actually, the first sort of genre work I did. And this was like you. I was supposed to be writing this really serious hardback history of Sydney, and I was in the library every day reading royal commissions on sand dunes in Surrey Hills in the 1800s. It was a bit dull. And so I started playing around with this idea. I'm not going to go into it. Adelaide's not that kind of festival, but it was a very silly idea for a very silly book, which I wrote and had great fun with and sold lots of copies. And that came together like yours. It was like 47,000 words in 3 days. Because I had the idea, and boom, it started to work. Then I sat down to plot that out because I figured it was going somewhere. And I had this, my usual plot. And these two characters, I needed them to sort of intersect at this point so they could go off and do their different, blueprint things. Anyway, they met on the page, and they started to chat. And, they're starting to get it on. And, within about 2 or 3 pages, it's like, whoa, get a room. And this was not my intention. And yet that relationship between those two characters actually became sort of one of the major arcs of the entire series. And if I'd stuck rigidly to the blueprint, that wouldn't have happened. So,
do you ever find that sometimes you put something into a novel and you've no idea why it's there, and it's a kind of like a strange moment that doesn't seem to have any relevance, but later on, it suddenly presents the answer. That's why I always sometimes think that the idea is that the whole book is up there somewhere, and you're digging away to get to
it's
it.
like,
'cause I've done that a few times where I put something in, and I have no idea why it's there, but it just feels like it should be. And then it'll become the whole raison d'etre, maybe, of the whole novel.
Yeah, sculptors sometimes say that. They say, they get a big block of marble, the sculpture is in there already, and it's just their job to chip all the other stuff away. And in a sense, you're right, the novel is already there.
So that's about trusting your instinct, right? That develops from where?
I think from time and experience.
Yeah.
Like you said earlier, John, that you know how to write a novel. That once you've written some and you feel confident that whatever surprises come along, whatever problems come along, you should be able to fix them. You should be able to solve that puzzle. That's the job. But you should be able to trust yourself that you will be able to.
What about redrafting? I sometimes come across new writers who think a first draft is a finished book. Personally, I do a lot of redrafting. What about you two? How much? So, John Boyne, I think you do about 10 drafts per book.
Give or take, I would say maybe somewhere around 8 to 10 drafts.
What's that process like? Like, what's the difference between a first draft and a second draft?
My favourite draft of all is the second draft. Because when I write the first draft, I kind of just power my way to the end and try to get some kind of story down, some kind of characters. I don't really worry about it too much. I don't worry about... Is the dialogue good? Is there nice writing? I just want something to work from. And then that second draft is where it really starts to take shape, and it's the one that takes me the longest to write. And I love that, because when I finish that first draft, I feel almost the hard work is done, because you've got a basic story. You've got a beginning, a middle, and an end, and there's stuff there. And from the second draft on, I don't know, it just feels like pure pleasure to me. Then you sit down with like the first page or two, and you start shifting it around, and maybe you'll lose half the words.
So when do you show it to your editor, though?
I would say around maybe 6 or 7 in, when I feel that I can't see it anymore. I need somebody, and I've worked with the same editor for so many years that we're a very trusting relationship, and I need him to kind of use fresh eyes on it. And what I always find is that when we sit down to talk about it, all the things that he says are problematic or need looking at, I always find myself going, yeah, I know, I've just been like too lazy to fix it, and kind of hoping to slip it past him, and can't. And that's what a good editor does, I guess. Oh, it's raining.
John Birmingham, at what point do you show it to an editor?
The first draft, mate. They get their job to do.
Oh my God, I'd be terrified to give a first draft.
In fact, I'm grinding through a first draft at the moment. I'll be going back to my hotel later on to do some more work on it. And when I get, when I'm sort of stuck on a page, I will tell myself, it's just the first draft. Just get it up there on the screen, and, that well-paid editor can sort it out later on.
As we all know, editors are vastly underpaid, sadly. Sorry if you're getting wet out there. It's going to be worth you sticking around.
I think this is the first time it's rained in my 5 weeks in Australia.
It's the first time it's rained.
And it is my last afternoon.
You're bringing Ireland to us before you leave. Okay, I'm going to go to audience questions soon, but I interviewed last week Jerry Saltz, who's the art critic for New York Magazine. And something he said reminded me of something you said, John Birmingham. He says, what you don't like is as important as what you do, and that you should look hard and look openly at the stuff you don't like, because it can help you refine your own artistic values. John, in How to Be a Writer, you have a story about David Webber's characters, I think, that you like this book, but the characters are always chuckling and laughing, and it kind of annoyed you. But it made you go back and revise your own work. So tell me about reading what you don't like and what it can teach you.
Well, this is one of the things, like if you're going to write, you have to read. And, everybody will have opinions about what they're reading, but in some ways, as a writer, reading gets ruined for you, because you can't read purely for pleasure. The part of you, there is an inner editor who's constantly judging and thinking, I'd have done that slightly differently, or asking, why did you do that? Or in the case of Webber, why is this character chuckling all the time? And then saying, oh God, do my characters do that? I better go check. So it's, it really is a larger question. Like, I find it incredible that those young, long-haired 20s writers, a lot of them say they don't have time to read, and I just think you don't have time to write then, mate, because it's.
I remember teaching a creative writing class at a university a few years ago, and there was like 12 people in the class. And the first day when I met them all, I went around the room and asked them what they were reading at the moment, and only 3 of them were reading books. And the other 9 all had some excuse why they hadn't read a book in a year. And then I asked them, how many of you in 10 years' time would like to be a full-time novelist? And they all put their hands up. And I don't get that. It's how can you? It's like wanting to be a professional footballer and just never going out and playing football. But it goes back to not to drag it to me myself, but that idea of wanting to be something without wanting to actually do the work.
Yeah.
You know, just, I want to be a writer, but I don't want to have to read, or I don't want to have to write really either, you know. So,
Yeah, and it avoids the pleasure in the moment. You know,
Yeah.
you want to have done rather than do.
And actually, just on the chuckling thing, my characters always hesitate for a moment, then turn away.
Yeah.
And whenever I finish the first draft of a book, I feed that phrase in to see how many times I've used it. And it's usually like 30 times, and I have to keep changing it. I think we all have little lines that we just fall back on.
With Stephen King, it's the characters squeeze their fists so hard they cut bloody half moons into their palms with their fingernails. Just go back and read, particularly his 70s and 80s Word. There's a lot of bleeding hands in there.
How do you switch modes for different kinds of books? So, for example, these two books are incredibly different in their tone and their style, whereas writers like me kind of feel like maybe you've only got one real style. How do you shed one voice or tone and take on another? Is it easy? Is it difficult? How do you switch like that?
Look, you know, we all have different faces that we show to the world depending on where we are. Like, you know, the face that you're seeing from me now is not the one that my kids see when I'm at home. And in a sense, the voices that we put on the page are different. Look, for me, personally, it probably is a function of the fact that for 10 years before I wrote Falafel, I was a magazine writer. And so I wrote for Rolling Stone and Wisdom, the Cricketer's Almanac, and Long Bay Prison News. And you tend to, you know, they all have a house style and they all tell their stories in different ways. So as a magazine writer, I got quite used to shifting gear between each one. But I don't know. I mean, you know, your books are all quite different. Like, it's...
Yeah, but I'd see similarities. I suppose the big difference for me is between the adult books and the young adult books. But I don't find it a big shift in my head. I sort of feel when I sit down, when I know what I'm writing a kid's book or an adult book.
So do you know that at the start?
Oh, I do, because it's just really about the central character. It's either a child or an adult. And,
right.
If I'm going to write a book with a child at the centre, I'll do it as a kid's book. So I do know at the start, but I don't find it too difficult to shift gear, actually. And I'm writing for the first time, I'm writing a picture book at the moment for small children. So it's only like, 800 words of rhyme, basically, that would be all lovely illustrated and stuff. And I fell into it really easy. It was just, well, this is sometimes how a book can come about. Because I had asked this really very handsome editor in London of picture books at my publishing house, and I asked him out on a date. And but he was going out with somebody, so he turned me down. At least I'm sure that's the reason he turned me down. But he said he was going out with somebody. But I really wanted to spend time with him. And he said to me, "Would you ever consider writing a picture book?" Because he's a picture book editor. And I said, "Sure, I'll do that. I'll do that." And so
Shame it's so short.
I basically, committed myself to like 3 of these things just because I fancied the guy. That doesn't make me sound great, does it?
That's how I got into journalism. I followed this girl into a journalism lecture, and that actually determined the course of the next 20 years for me.
Again, yeah. So.
Okay, well, how are we going? I've got one more question, and then I'm opening it up to you guys. What about research? So, John Boyne, I read that you once spent some time writing in the rooms of the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg.
Yeah.
That's some sort of
I did
method
that for
research.
House of Special Purpose, which was set during the Russian Revolution. I wrote a lot of that in St. Petersburg and in the Winter Palace. I would just go down there on the Hermitage with my laptop and sit there every day and write and kind of hope that, something would, enter my writing stream from there. In my younger years, when I started writing novels and they were very historical, I used to do an awful lot of research. I don't really do it so much anymore. And I certainly don't do it before I start, or very much of it. Again, I prefer to just get the thing down, and then I know what I don't know, and I need to go and find all that stuff out. So I think my books have become much less researchy anyway than when I was younger.
That's interesting. What about you, John?
I love it. I love the research bit. The big trap for young players is to sort of enjoy the research so much that you bury the reader in it. But I did some last year on cyber war and like how easy it is to collapse a civilization with a little bit of software, and that was horrifying, but because it's very easy. But I'm still research. Like I'm 2 books into this series, and I'm still doing the research because I love it so much.
So you do it as you go, or do you have a chunk of time first?
Yeah, look, unlike John, I do a lot before I start because I like to feel that I know what I'm talking about. But one of the great things about writing now is Wikipedia. And the internet in general is like, there's no excuse for not finding out stuff that you want to know. Like at one point, in one book I had Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was smoking. I thought, I wonder what kind of cigarettes he smoked. 20 years ago, that would have been maybe 3 or 4 days research to find that out. Nowadays, it's a Google search. It was Moreland's with 3 little gold bands around it.
The detail, yeah. Okay, we have some people already lined up, I think, at the microphone. I just would like to remind you that questions have a question mark at the end, and I'm going to give a gold star to the most succinct question asker today.
No pressure.
Not at all. Okay. Hello to both of you, and thank you very much for your talk. That was great. I'm a trained journalist. I no longer work in the media, but I've been sitting on an idea for a novel, kind of an autobiographical nature for a while, but I've not gone ahead with it. My question to either or both of you is, have you ever sat on an idea for a story for a long time? And if so, why? And perhaps if you ended up writing that book, what drove you to finally do it?
Go write your book. And yeah, at any given point, I got probably 8 or 9 ideas in my story drawer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say the same, and you feel when that right moment comes. But if you have the one idea right now, yeah, go write the book. Sit down and make the time.
Thank you, John Boyne. I guess the question I'd like to ask is how you feel about the reaction to the historical inaccuracies in The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas with respect to teaching about the Holocaust.
Well, the first thing I'd say is that nobody writes a novel in order for it to be used in a classroom. It's written as a book to read, and if a teacher or a school chooses to use a novel in that way, that's their choice. It's not really my fault. In terms of historical inaccuracies, I have to say I don't think in a novel, particularly one which is subtitled a fable, as mine is, there can be any historical inaccuracies. There can be good writing and bad writing. There can be anachronisms, but it's all made up. The characters are made up.
Yeah, that's right.
And for example, in Striped Pyjamas, everybody thinks it's set at Auschwitz. The word Auschwitz is never used in the book, not once. So I created my own camp in that book. I do know that there's lots of people who would say with a subject matter like that, you can't change anything. And that's a point of view. It's just not mine. So I thought the emotional honesty is the most important thing.
Unfortunately...
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, but what's happening is that the book is used in schools and is taught historically, and I think it does create problems.
But I would also say this, that I've gone into, I would say, 500 schools over the last 14 years in different countries, and I have always made a point of saying to kids during that talk that this is a made-up story, and if you are moved by this, here's the books now that you should move on to. So
it's not a history book.
Yeah, it's not.
Thank you.
Mate, I did 7 days in Long Bay Jail on remand for contempt of the North Sydney Magistrates Court.
My editor.
When I fronted up the burly policeman, the first thing I asked was, where can I write for the prison magazine? He immediately shoved a big paperback book in my hand and told me to get into the cell block. The book was Papillon.
And there's a question coming, I believe.
The question is, could either and or both of you speak to the arguable differences, for better or for worse, between the writing of the book, your general reader of the book, the one who reads it aloud and its translation and adaptation into written screenplay and actual cinema experience?
Thank you. Who wants to go first?
Well, I think once you've written it, it goes out into the world on its own, and if it gets adapted for screen or theatre or whatever, it becomes somebody else's piece to do. And I'm good at letting it go in that way.
Yeah, you got to. Falafel was adapted into a stage play and a screenplay, and I think the stage play was much more successfully adapted.
Wow.
Did you guys have anything to do with the screenplays or
Yeah, quite a
with
bit.
writing on it?
I didn't write it, but I had quite a bit to do with it. But I do remember a writer saying to me that who had a fairly bad movie made of his book, that somebody had said to him, "Oh, they really ruined your book," and he was like, "They didn't do a thing to my book."
That's right. Yeah.
They didn't do a thing to my book. My
Yeah.
book still exists.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. Next question.
I have a question for either John Birmingham or both of you. My son is a journalist. If he ever wanted to write fiction, what advice would you give him?
Look, to be honest, it depends. Does he want to write fiction to pay the mortgage, or does he want to write fiction because he wants to write fiction? If he burns to write fiction, just go write it. If he wants to pay the mortgage, that's a different story. You can do it, and in fact, there are thousands, possibly tens of thousands of people writing and making a reasonable living from writing, and they're independently published. They put their manuscripts out, they stick them up on Amazon. They work the marketing levers. You can make a pretty good living as a writer if you are willing to work commercially and to work that machine in the way that it needs to be worked. Amazon is not a bookstore. It's a search engine for people with credit cards and no impulse control. And once you realise that, you can make a living as a writer. But if you want, come and find me afterwards, and we'll have a chat, because it's there's a lot of stuff unfolds from that question. But if you want to write, go write.
Can I ask one more very quick question? Any of your works going to be adapted for screen?
Well, yeah. There's a couple in pre-production hell at the moment. Will they ever get to the screen? Who knows? But I write cinematically, so yeah, some of mine, and
Excellent.
A couple in production as well. But can I add one thing to the earlier question? It was just that I'm a big believer in creative writing groups and creative writing classes, that what do writers need most is a reader. And that if you're in a group with people, 8 people say, and you're sharing work and you're able to hear it, hear the criticisms, filter it, that can be very productive.
I think McCourt started that way, didn't he? Frank McCourt?
Yeah, probably, yeah. I mean, I did. I started on a creative writing course. Yep.
We have another question waiting.
Yes, hello. My question is for John Birmingham. John, I first became acquainted with your works through He Died With A Falafel in His Hand, and I guess my question's going to indicate just how much of a South Australian I am. What do you call a falafel?
Okay.
Do you not have falafel here?
Okay, yeah, falafel. Okay, you get your flatbread, your tabbouleh, sometimes your hummus, but for me it's like chili and yogurt sauce, and a falafel, the little sort of hard yellow
ball.
chickpea thing. Usually 3 of them smashed down, chili and yogurt on top, wrapped up. That's your falafel. Be careful how you eat it.
Very much like a gyros.
Yeah. Very much, but with falafel, not with a delicious protein.
That question's live with me forever.
That gets the gold star.
Yeah, that might get the gold star. You're right. Do we have any more questions? I've got more. If you want to ask one, we've got a few minutes left.
Actually, I want to go back to one you
Yes.
asked earlier about the drafting process and the editing process. One of the things we didn't touch on, and I think it has changed a bit probably since the early 80s, is that with word processing, you edit a lot as you go through now. Like I talked before about the 25 minutes I do at the start. What I'm normally doing in that 25 minutes is reading what I wrote the previous day and just giving it a tidy up. And so I think first drafts now are usually a lot tighter and a lot tidier and cleaner than first drafts were when people were banging them out on the old Remington.
Do you do that, John? Read yesterday's work?
Yeah, I do actually. The first thing I do is just the last page or two, just to kind of get back into tone and to know where I left things. Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't talked about voice. Oh, is there another question? Yes, I'll let you ask one.
Hello, this is also about process. I wanted to ask, firstly, you, John, in your book, The Hearts...
Well, that doesn't help.
And neither does John B.
John B. The Heart's The Heart's Invisible Furies.
That's me. Okay.
That's you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, I felt that the entrance sentence is probably one of the finest entrants to any book I've ever read. And I just wanted to know, did you have that idea to start? Do both of you start with the beginning, or do you put your first chapter, and maybe for Charlotte as well, or does that come when you've done the whole book and you go back and say, now I'm going to start there?
I mean, that opening sentence of that book was...
Can you tell us what the opening sentence
I can try. In the parish of Goleen in West Cork... No, hang on. It's
fabulous, but I can't...
Father James Monroe stood on the altar of the church of Star of the Sea Church in the parish of Goleen in West Cork and denounced my mother as a whore.
Oh, that's a great line.
That is good.
But it goes on to say that it was at that time we didn't know he'd fathered two children.
That's right, he'd fathered three children.
Yeah.
I like first lines.
Okay.
I'll just say one quick. The first line of my novel, This House is Haunted, it is, I blame Charles Dickens for the death of my father, which I think is my best first sentence.
And so the question is, do you start with the opening sentence?
Yeah, I'm very linear.
How does it come to you?
Yeah, it's... I love great opening paragraphs rather than opening sentences. Like I'm probably never going to top "He died with a falafel in his hand," and that was really just reportage. Except it's actually a shawarma. I'll spend days on an opening paragraph. I just because that's usually
just set the tone.
Yeah,
and you know where you're going then.
But do you do that at the beginning of
You
keep going back to it over and over and over again. With Leviathan, the first chapter of that, I must have rewritten that probably 10, 15 times, and I thought it was word perfect. When I gave it to the editor, she cut it from 60,000 words back to 30. And she was right, and I was wrong.
Brutal.
Yeah.
know, John Irving doesn't start his novels until he has the last sentence.
Really?
And when he has the last sentence in his head, that's when he starts.
I'll quite often start with an ending. I mean, I have the ending early on in the piece.
Sometimes it's an image. I don't know, it's in there, but I had to interview George R.R. Martin for the Herald a couple of years ago. It was when Game of Thrones was just starting on TV, and I wasn't as naff as to ask him where did the idea come from. I sort of sexed it up a bit, but he was kind enough to tell me that he was working on a TV series because he's a sci-fi writer originally, and it wasn't going very well. He was living in, I don't know, Texas or Arizona or something. It was really, really hot. He was sitting in his kitchen. He may have been in his underpants because it was so hot, and he was just like sweat's pouring off him. And he said, I closed my eyes and I just imagined the coldest place that I could imagine. And then he saw a big white wolf walking through it, and that was Westeros. And that was how we came to have Game of Thrones. So it can come from anywhere.
Thank you.
I'm afraid we're just about out of time, but thank you for the intention of your question. I am going to ask one last one, which is, why do you write? What keeps you going? A quick answer.
Just purely for the love of it. Honestly, I just love the act of writing. Simple as that.
I'd have to drive for Uber if I didn't. I got no other skills.
Look, we are out of time. Both the John B's will be in the signing tent momentarily. I commend their 40 gazillion books to you. You have an endless choice with these two, and you will love their work. Please join me in thanking John Birmingham and John Boyne.
Thank you. Thank you.